right, well, good morning, and for some, good afternoon. Welcome to Odoo Live. My name is Todd Farnham, and I am your marketing strategist and community manager here at Odoo San Francisco. And joining me today is business advisor and resident expert, Brett Heidemann.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, hi, how's it going? Today our presentation will be taking roughly 30 minutes or so. I haven't timed it yet, but it's somewhere in that window. And then we'll have the usual Q&A afterwards. And feel free to ask whatever you want during that. We'll talk about it then. There's a limit to what I'll be able to answer, but at the very least, we'll get you on the right track towards getting an answer. So,
perfect. Well, thanks, Brett. And yeah, today the topic is dynamic financial reporting. So if you guys like this video, be sure to subscribe below. And as Brett mentioned, we'll be answering questions throughout the webinar, and you can answer them in the chat box to the right. Now, some of the questions we might decide to save until the end of the Q&A so that Brett can better illustrate them. So just be sure to type them in the chat box, and we'll get them straight to you. Now, if you like these kind of webinars, we have them every single Wednesday in English and on Tuesdays in Spanish. So be sure to tune in and check us out, follow us on Twitter, and all that good stuff. I think that's about it. So, Brett, I'll pass it on to you, and thanks so much.
Thank you, Todd. Okay, so we're going to get started today. We're going to talk about dynamic financial reports. The reason why we're not calling this an accounting demo or an accounting, a general webinar is because we really are going to focus on specifically roughly one half of the accounting module, which is the reporting functionality. There's a lot to talk about. We have roughly 10 major financial reports that we're going to cover. And there's a couple other things I'm going to throw in there too. As my role here, I should probably introduce myself. I'm a business advisor here in the San Francisco office, the main headquarters for the US. And my job here is to present the software to people, listen to people's requirements for what the software needs to do for them, and also propose solutions, work with you one-on-one, that kind of a thing. So I'm familiar with having to use our software in lots of different ways to accommodate for general needs. But in this case, today, we're going to just talk about it in sort of a very high-level general use. However, if you want to get into the specifics with us, you can schedule a meeting. There's a link that's going to be posted in the webinar notes on this video. It's also going to be in the slideshow on the main slide that we have here for the introduction. And yeah, like I said, you can contact us to schedule time with us directly. So keep in mind, this will be sort of general high level, but work with us one-on-one if you'd like. So Todd, are you able to flip the switch and show my screen?
Absolutely.
Okay. Is it being shown?
Yep.
Okay. Great. So yes, like I said, here's the link. We'll display it a few more times if you want to schedule a meeting to talk one-on-one about specifically how you can use Odoo accounting to your benefit. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into the discussion. So what's on the agenda for today is we're going to start by talking about what's new in V11 specifically for accounting. And that sort of steps outside of just the dynamic financial reports, but I'll just give you a quick overview and list some of the things that are new that our R&D team has worked on to improve. Then from there, I'm going to actually start talking about it. We're going to get into the chart of accounts first. I find that's a really good place to begin with. We're going to discuss how you can create new accounts, work with them, and some of the functions within them, how they affect your reports. Then we're going to actually, this is going to take up the bulk of the webinar. We're going to talk about the various dynamic reports that we have. I'm pretty sure it's 10 from what I remember. 10 main dynamic reports that we're going to talk about. And then just as a couple of added items, partly because they're new and partly because I think it's worthwhile mentioning, you can get a lot of value. I'm going to talk about real briefly how you can do sub-accounts in Odoo, which, believe it or not, we didn't have until version 11. And also product margins. There's a report that it's a really cool report. I'm not going to go into too heavy of detail, but I want to show it at least. So without further ado, let's start by talking about what's new in Odoo V11. So one of the first things that I want to point out is we now have an easy setup for accounting using this progress bar. And I'll show you. I'll jump over to this demo database right now. And as you can see, this is the look of V11. It's subtle changes here and there. The interface is a little different. It's cleaner. It looks like it's higher resolution than it used to be. But anyway, jumping into accounting and going, as you can see right up here, we have a progress bar that we didn't have before. we had this before, which we've definitely improved. It's a more detailed step-by-step guide on getting started with accounting. But now we have sort of a easy flow, and we recommend that since all the data in Odoo is integrated and dependent upon each other, we recommend that you kind of follow this general flow and this order of operations. So, for example, when you first get started with Odoo Accounting, you can click on Company Data, and it will prompt you to enter all this stuff about your company, your address, things like that. I'm not going to go into every single field, but the nice thing is that it is basically treated like an activity that you need to complete. You could say this needs to be completed. Once you've finished it, there's a little check mark. So it makes it more of a actual interactive process to get your accounting started. It lets you know what the best practices are for getting started in this operations. As you can see, company data, then you can go and set up your specific bank account or bank accounts or credit card accounts too. Once you've created that, then it recommends that you go ahead and you define exactly when your fiscal year is. Once you've done that, you can then move on to setting up your chart of accounts, which we'll talk about in just a second. So yeah, first off, right off the bat, you have this new kind of user-friendly way to figure out exactly how to get started on accounting. Now, in addition to that, a lot of what R&D has been focused on in the last year for accounting is bringing it to more territories and making it more functional into new markets. And so we have a lot of new localizations with Mexico is the biggest one. From what I understand, that's one of the biggest operations that they've ever launched for a specific market. Accounting in Mexico is really complicated, and so they've completed that. That was actually finished a couple months ago, but now it's fully integrated with version 11. But also Spain, Switzerland, India, Netherlands, Germany, and Colombia to some extent too. They all have various things that are specifically targeted towards them to improve the localization. We're not really going to talk about that in dynamic reports, but I feel like now is a good time to mention that. Tax audit report. We had the tax audit report before, but it kind of was a little clunky. It split it into getting a report on the base value and then a specific separate report on the tax actual amount. So we've changed that so that it's all kind of in one place a little better. I'll show you a little later on. The check register report, that's a brand new report. What that really means, in check register, that's actually just old accounting terminology. That's just a way of looking at your bank transactions line by line by line, debits and credits with a running balance. And I'll show you that later on too. Finally, the consolidated journal report, that's another new report that we have. It allows you to report based on journals or in a month-by-month basis, and I'll show you that too. So that's some of the new features in accounting, and of course the interface itself is a little different. But moving on, and sub-accounts, I forgot that one. Yeah, we'll talk about sub-accounts in detail too. Okay, so let's get into the actual software itself. Let's start by talking about the chart of accounts. And I don't really have any slide information to write out here. Basically, it's better to show you, I would say. So let's jump over to the chart of accounts. You can set it up here if you want to, but mainly on a daily basis, you'll go to configuration and chart of accounts right here. And so the chart of accounts, we have different templates, different default sets of accounts that are used for different markets. This is the one for US and North American chart of accounts. But depending on where you're working from, where you're logged in, you'll get a different set of accounts to work with by default. So when you actually jump into a specific account, you'll see the kind of information you can work with. I'll go ahead and open, say, bank. And this is the account screen where you're setting up your initial accounts. You see there's a code to identify it. There is a name for it, of course, and then a type. And then we have some other fields. I'll talk about group later on because that actually has to do with sub-accounts. Over on the right, you'll see exactly where the account is going to pop up on the profit and loss statement and where it's going to pop up on the balance sheet based on what type you choose. And we don't allow you to create new types because we pretty much have every type that's out there in terms of where, what kind of account it could be. Basically, you have receivable, meaning the money owed to you, payable, meaning money that you owe that you need to pay. You'd have the bank transfer and cash transactions down below here. And also assets and liabilities, both are current and meaning that they're to be paid or received within this current financial year, or you have non-current, which can't be paid or received until next year or later. So we have both types of assets and liabilities. Equity, that's used to record capital gains and losses. And also, finally, you have your income and expenses, which are going to be used to create the profit and loss statement, which we're about to talk about. So you have all those different types, as well as depreciation too, if that's something you're working with assets. But anyway, so you have all the different account types. Once again, you can refer to this diagram over to the side here to see, depending on how you set up this account, where it's going to pop up in order on these reports by default, and if it's going to appear. So other things, you could set default taxes, things like that. It's pretty self-explanatory. I wanted to point out that you can also duplicate an account. So when you're initially setting up your chart of accounts, if you want to, you can import all of your accounts. We recommend strongly just working with what we have in here, renaming the things as needed, and if necessary, you could create one from scratch and fill out all those fields, or honestly, we recommend oftentimes taking one that is very similar with the same type and everything, and then just duplicating it, as you can see, and then giving it a new number, a new name, and things like that. And the reason why we recommend that is just it's cleaner. It'll be more likely to operate the way you want it to. And then another thing that I wanted to point out is that from here, from Action, if you wanted to, you could view the specific journal items that are linked to that account, if there are any journal items that have been created for that account yet. Let's see, what's a good example? I would say that the expenses, perhaps, would probably have some items here. Yeah, exactly. So journal items, you can view those listed out here. So it's a quick link to that. With Studio, and this is kind of a tangent, but Studio, I actually just created a smart button right here to view journal items more quickly too. It's the same thing, it's just now you have a quick link and it shows you the quantity. So keep that in mind. This is somewhat customizable when you're viewing your accounts. So I think that's enough about chart of accounts for now. You can ask questions about it later, but I think it's a good starting point because it's going to be referred to over and over and over again while we work through these dynamic reports. So the dynamic reports themselves, like I said, this is going to take up the majority of this webinar. Starting with the profit and loss statement. So profit and loss, if you're new to accounting and if you're CEO and it's not really your department or something like that, just a very basic explanation. It's a summary of your revenues, your costs, and your expenses during a specific period of time. So, there's a starting range, there's an ending range to it, and you'll see the summary of these things. I should go ahead and jump over and pull that up. As you can see, it's under reporting, profit and loss. It even refers up here that we're working on a U.S. type accounting setup that is GAAP compliant, for what that's worth. We added that in V11. But here's the profit and loss statement itself. And this is what most of the dynamic reports look like. They have these same kind of functions for the most part for each one. So I'll give a brief explanation about the profit and loss statement itself, and then I'll talk about some of the functions that carry over to each report. So the profit and loss statement, like I said, it's going to show you incomes and expenses over a period of time. In this case, it's defaulting to showing me the year 2017, and it's showing all profits and all expenses, or incomes and expenses over this year. And the way it lists it out, it shows it to us by account. So these are those accounts from the chart of accounts that I was just looking at. We have the product sales account, you have an amount over here, you have the foreign exchange gain, so on and so forth, and it summarizes everything for you. Pretty standard stuff if you're used to accounting and familiar with it, but if this is somewhat new to you and you're just trying to get a little bit more knowledge about accounting, that's what the profit and loss statement is for. Now, the way the dynamic reports work is that you have these tools up here that can help you work with them, and that's why we call them dynamic. You can interact with it directly and kind of modify it. In this case, I'll demonstrate the fact that you can choose the period. So right now, like I said, it's 2017 that we're looking at, but if you wanted to, you could show just this month, for example. And now it'll narrow it down to just showing me things in October. And as you can see, it immediately changes that, immediately takes effect to it. If I want to, you can also do a side-by-side comparison with other periods. So I've chosen month. If I want to, I can say that I also want to see the previous 3 periods before that. And so it'll take that amount, the October, or the monthly amount, and then it'll also show side-by-side going back in time. So if you want to, you can do a very customized period and then side-by-side comparisons. In this demo database, I don't have a lot of different data for these past months, so it's not very impressive looking, but you get the idea. Now, in addition to month, quarter, all these kind of presets, you can do a custom one. If you want to show just specifically the last 4 days, for example, you could do that. you have all these filtering rules that you can apply here. I'll talk about the other things a little bit later as we talk about the other reports, but I'm going to go ahead and jump into the next report that I want to cover, which is the balance sheet. And the balance sheet is a snapshot. So whereas the profit and loss showed you kind of a range of time in all of the balances, the balance sheet just shows you at a specific point in time what your assets, liabilities, and equity is set at, what the balance is at that specific date. You get to choose that. So I'll jump over to that now. I'll go to the balance sheet. And as you can see, it's got the same tools. It's the same layout, so you'll get very familiar with it. It's pretty user-friendly once you understand just how to read these reports. But it's different. It's showing us different stuff. The balance sheet is going to show us the assets, meaning the cash and equipment that you currently have at the top. Then the liabilities, meaning what is owed, and then down at the bottom, the net is a resulting amount. So we have your assets, you have your liabilities, and then the net amount. As you can see, it can be kind of a lengthy report because we're incorporating a lot of different things into it. One thing I want to point out is that you can choose, for any of the dynamic reports really, whether you're viewing it in accrual basis, which is the default, or in cash basis. And if you select cash basis method instead, it might look a little different because what it's doing, what cash basis is doing, is applying a filter that removes the payables and receivables. And the idea is that it will only factor in the actual cash collected and paid, and it would ignore the forecasted amount of money associated with. And that's just standard accounting. Most accounting platforms have that, basically cash basis or accrual basis, and the main difference is whether AR and AP are factored into it or not. And so I wanted to explain what that does. Another thing that we actually have on this little action button here that we've added as of version 11 is just a simple unfold button. Because as you can see, you have all these accounts. You could drill into them. You can view the details, but you can unfold all of them at once or fold all of them at once. It's just a quick organizational thing, but believe it or not, it's something that people ask for a lot because if you have dozens and dozens of accounts, it could be tedious to open up a P&L statement or balance sheet and have to drill into that. So we added that. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next report, which is the drum roll. Cash flow statement. Okay, so the cash flow statement, it gives an idea of the flow of cash in and out of the company. Believe it or not, it's actually kind of complicated. It is generally just for accountants to work with. There's not a lot of value to, say, a CEO that's overseeing the project generally. And the general idea of it, I'll jump over to it right now, actually. The general idea of the cash flow statement is that it is going to split your report into your normal operating activities, in and out cash flows related to investing, and cash flow from external sources like donations, things like that, and then also cash transactions from borrowing and lending and things like financing. So it'll show things like that on this report here. And like I said, it's simplistic in overall principle, but because of the different ways that these funds can come in and out, it actually is kind of complicated. So I really generally recommend that if you want to mess around with this and really get a lot of value out of it, it's for accountants and CTOs and stuff. So the other thing I want to point out while we're at it is I wanted to say that with any of these dynamic reports, you have these options over here for printing, which if I click this right here, it'll print in however you have this formatted. So if you have the accounts drilled into or not, it'll print out a PDF, which as you can see, like so, displays like that. And it's pretty convenient and pretty easy to generate that. Or you can also export it as a spreadsheet if you want to, a CSV file. And it's the same information, but it populates a bunch of data fields. So you can do that with any of the dynamic reports. That's an option. Next report, I'm going to jump to the executive summary. And this is Odoo specific. This is something that I don't know if I've seen it in another accounting platform. But what it is, it's just a very quick summary of the profit and loss, the cash flow, and the balance sheet that we just covered. Plus, it also has some extra performance and position data. So I'll jump over to that now, reporting executive summary. So like I said, it summarizes those three reports that we just looked at. It shows you just the key selective information from that document. And if you want to, you can click on it and go directly to the profit and loss statement for it, or the cash flow statement or balance sheet. But the goal of this, the idea and why we call it the executive summary, this is for somebody who's not necessarily an accountant, but rather a CEO or a boss, or somebody that just needs to take a quick high-level overview and see the statistics of these. And we selected these fields just based on our understanding of what most people in that position might want to see. And like I said, there's also the added performance and position things that an executive might also feel interested in. And I can define those real quick in case you're curious. The gross profit margin, right there, as you can see, it's the contribution each individual sale made by your business minus any direct costs needed to make those sales, things like labor and materials. So that'll usually be a percentage. The net profit margin, that's the contribution to each individual sale made by your business minus any direct costs needed to make those sales, as well as also any fixed overheads your company has. So overheads as in like rent and electricity, utilities, things like that, that you need to pay as a result of those sales. May or may not factor in or not, but these values are coming directly from the other modules that we have, like sales and projects and manufacturing, things like that. So that's how these values get determined. That's kind of an insane number right there of negative 1,800. That's probably because of the way I set up this database. But anyway, also return on investment, you can see the ratio of the net profit that you've made related to the amount of assets that your company has across all of your different invoices. And assets, as you'll see later, you can have depreciation values set up too. So this actually is a fairly complex calculation. Position, we also have the average debtors days, which is pretty easy. That's basically just the average number of days that it takes your customers to pay you in full. And then similarly, the average creditors days, that's the average number of days that it takes you to pay what you owe, basically. So it keeps track of that. That's kind of a good value. And a lot of times it's useful if one of these numbers is significantly longer than the other. In other words, if you're getting paid faster than it takes you to pay things, that's pretty good for cash flow. But anyway, short-term cash forecast, this shows you how much cash is expected to come in and out based on the balance of your sales account for the month minus the balance of your purchase account. May or may not see that, but it's helpful for short-term cash flow information. And current assets to liabilities, finally, it's also referred to sometimes as a current ratio, and that's the ratio of current assets, in other words, assets for the year, that could be turned into cash in this coming year, to the current liabilities. Liabilities will be due within the next year. And it's typically used as a measure of a company's ability to service its debt and handle its debt. So anyway, you can refer to this later. There's documentation that points out exactly what these things do if you're ever curious about it. But once again, the whole point of this report is for manager utility, for CEOs and whatnot, to get a lot of quick but useful information to help them run the business. I wanted to point out while we're talking about this one that the reason that this report exists and the way this report was created is actually using the ability to kind of mess around with your financial reports themselves. And I'm definitely not going to get too into the thick of it with this, but if you're in development mode, if you're in debug mode, you have the ability to actually go into financial reports. And if you open up Executive Summary, you'll see how this was created. It's just taking little bits from different reports, and it is populating them. So you can control all the settings here. You can control whether or not certain options are available to it. And for each one of these things, for example, the cash flow statement, you can click on it and choose which of those sections from the cash flow statement you can choose. So I don't know if you guys were aware that that's a thing, but you can build your own financial reports if you want to, your own dynamic reports by going into that. And that is exactly how we came up with the executive report. So like I said, not going to get too into it, but if you have an idea for a specific financial report that you would like to have in your company, contact us, schedule a meeting, let us know, and we can work through it together and see if there's something we can come up with. Moving on, I'm going to go to the, and it's probably going to get a little bit faster because the reports are getting a little bit less involved as we go on. But the check register, that's a new one that we have. And it's a very simplistic one. Basically, it just shows you a list of your debits and credits for your bank or banks. And like I said, it's new, and it gives you very easy viewing of the balance. And I'll show you. It's very simplistic, but it's right here, check register. Sure. check register right here. As you can see, it's not showing a bunch of different accounts. It's really just showing any account that's a bank. And within that, it breaks it down to all the transactions over time. In this case, I set up the demo database yesterday, and so they're all for yesterday's date. But you'd see it kind of also grouped by date over time. You see debits, you see credits, and it gives you a running balance. So we had this debit, now the balance is affected, so on and so forth. Any of these things, and you're going to see this over and over again with the dynamic reports, if you want to, you can click on it, and you can view the specific payment that it's referring to. You can see all the details about it, when it was made, what kind of a payment, who it went to. And using the breadcrumbs of Odoo, the navigation tools, you can jump back, and that's fine. So, yeah, new report, pretty simple, but it gives you the ability to very easily, quickly see how your bank's doing. And this one looks like it is in the negative pretty bad, so that's not good. Moving on, let's say the partner reports is the next one. We have actually a couple specific reports under the category of partner reports. First off, the partner ledger. What that is, it's currently open balances with any customer or vendor. And sometimes the terminology throws people. Partner, we just mean that as contact. It can be a customer, it could be a vendor, it could be a company, it could be a customer and a vendor at the same time. It doesn't matter. We just use partner. That's sort of our terminology for it to refer to that. So that report is going to show you any open balances with any of them. And I'll show you that in a second. We also have the aged receivable and the aged payable, your AR, AP. Of course, receivable, if you're not familiar, it's things that are owed to you, you're waiting to receive it, and things owed by you. And it says aged, that just means it's going to show it on a scale of time. So I'm going to go and jump over to those reports. As you can see, they're categorized under here for partner reports. Partner ledger, it's just showing me these specific contacts, whether they're a vendor or a customer, it's just showing me them out of my whole list of contacts because there's some sort of an open balance or there's some sort of journal entries and things that need to be logged. And of course, once again, you can drill into it, you can open it up, you can view that payment specifically. You can also view the journal entry, which we'll get into in greater detail with the general ledger in a second, or you can provide an annotation. And that's, once again, you're going to see that across the board for all the for all of the dynamic reports. You click annotate, you make a note here saying something like check on payment dispute, and then you log it, and it will appear as a footnote icon, and then if you scroll down, you'll see the detail of it here. And if you've completed it, it's no longer relevant, you can delete it later on. So that's very simple, but mandatory for accounting functions. So anywhere that you see that in dynamic reports, you can do an annotation. So there's the partner ledger, and then like I said, there's the AR and AP. So you'll see anything that you're waiting to receive revenue on, and you can see it based on time. Also, if you want to, you can actually go back in time because it's a custom thing. So if you want to see, or in the future, when things are going to be due and how overdue it would be at that point, you can do that if you want to forecast like that and spend a lot of time. Same thing for age payable. It's the exact same thing. It's something that you yourself need to pay, and it's good to keep track of this to know when things are going to be overdue. So, moving on, the general ledger itself, it shows your journal lines grouped by their accounts, and if you want to, you can also view the respective journal entries or any bills or invoices that they are linked to. So just terminology real quick, once again, in case accounting is somewhat new to you. The way it works is that if you have, say, an invoice, the invoice is going to create a journal entry. And the journal entry itself is going to have a couple journal lines. So it goes, invoice, journal entry, and then within that journal entry, there's those lines. Each line would be a debit or a credit. And so I could show you real quick if we just look over at, say, an invoice. If I open up just a random invoice right here, like this one, let's say. We have an invoice, and that's the invoice document. We sold this laptop keypad, or 6 of them, at this price to this customer. That's all very straightforward. But you'll see that it has generated, as soon as you validate the invoice, it generates a journal entry. And you can view the journal entry, and the entry itself is actually broken down into multiple lines. And so we have one line here that is a debit, and another line here that is a credit. This happens automatically with Odoo as soon as you validate it. And so these individual things right here, they're called journal lines. So getting back to the general ledger report, what that is, if we open that up, the general ledger is going to show you all of your accounts. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and do that thing I did earlier where I unfold all so we can see everything. And it's going to show you the individual journal lines grouped by account. So whereas a journal entry can have a couple of journal lines for different accounts, of course, because it's maybe debiting one account and crediting another account, the general ledger is a way to see the individual journal lines from all those different journal entries grouped by their account. And that's all that is. And it's standard in accounting. You're going to see that in any accounting platform. But as you can see, it's pretty easy to work with. You can see them listed out chronologically. And once again, if you want to, you can click on any of them. You can view the specific payment. You can view the overall journal entry if you want to. In this case, you could see the source of it, go back to it. And if it is related to, say, an invoice, you can view the invoice. Or if it's related to a vendor bill, you can view the vendor bill. So you have all that information at your fingertips with the general ledger. So it's a good report, it's standard, you're going to need it for sure, and it does what it's supposed to do. And so finally, well, we have a couple more actually. The trial balance is a pretty unique report. All that does is it shows you not the partners that have an open balance, not the customers or vendors, but rather the accounts themselves that currently have an open balance. And it's a pretty simple report. If I jump over to here, you can see that these specific accounts right here have some debits and have some credits that we can use. So it narrows it down to that. That's all the trial balance is. And then next we have consolidated journals. That is a new report in Odoo V11. And what it does is it shows your debits and credits grouped not by accounts and not by partner or anything, but rather by journal, by the overall journal. Because you can have your invoices journal, you can have your vendor bills journal, stock accounting journal. So we now allow you to view that stuff by journal. If you want to just see how everything's looking in terms of invoices, you can view it that way. We also add the ability to view it by month too. So here's the Consolidated Journals report. Like I said, it's brand new. And as you can see, it's splitting it up by the journals themselves. Up at the top, you can see this is the summation of the invoice. If I drill into it, it actually shows it by month. So within that, you're seeing your journals by month over time. Down below, on the other hand, we just see a quick summation of the months themselves, which is kind of somewhat independent of this, but we threw it in there anyway, because sometimes people just want to see things listed very simply by month. So there it is, Consolidated Journals, new report. Finally, the last dynamic report I want to talk about is the tax report. And the tax report, it's going to display both your tax amounts, the thing that is actually the tax, and also the base amount, so the thing that is getting taxed, and it's grouped by sales and purchases. And if I jump over to that right now, we have, like I said at the beginning, we've actually changed this a bit. This view is the same as it was before, where you see your taxes themselves, the different tax rates, or tax groups that you can have. So different percentages, different consolidated taxes of maybe county tax and city tax grouped together. Anyway, you'll see them all listed out over here, split up by taxes that you've paid and taxes that you've received. And then in addition to that, if you jump on this, this is where we've changed it. The audit is now different. Before, if you clicked on this option, you could audit the tax itself, or you could audit the base amount that is getting taxed. But now, if you click on it, it's just one audit report, and it groups them all. It says it's listing the things that are the taxes right next to the things that are getting taxed. And if you want to, with this report view, you can use the grouping tools, or you can use the filtering tools, and say, I only want to view the things that are the originator tax, or I only want to view the base amount. So we find this to be a little easier, and it's more convenient for reporting purposes if you can just see the items themselves side by side, the taxes and their base amounts. So we changed that. It's a little different. And that's it. Those are the 10 dynamic financial reports. There's just a couple of bonus items I want to throw in before we go to your questions. Sub-accounts. By popular demand, we've added sub-accounts, which we should have added a long time ago, honestly. All it really is, it's just a way of grouping. Bless you, Todd.
Thank you.
It's a way of grouping your accounts into groups for reporting purposes to display on your different dynamic reports. And the key element is that you make sure you need to enable it. You need to configure it properly. So I'm going to jump over to, I'm going to go back to our chart of accounts because I skipped over something earlier on purpose. If you go to, say, the, the expenses, you have this option down here, this field called group. And this is how we handle sub-accounts. Basically, you put your accounts into a group, and thereby anything belonging to that group is a sub-account of that. And you can do groups within groups within groups as far down as you want. You can set up all of the rules of it. As you can see, you can set a parent group above it, and you can set a little code prefix just for quick reference. But in this case, I basically said that expenses belong to expense group 1. Now the missing ingredient here is that you need to actually enable it so that it'll display on your reports. So I'll go to configuration, I'll go to financial reports, I will go into, say, the profit and loss, and this is what it is. You have to enable it. And our R&D people worked really hard and unfortunately misspelled hierarchy. But that's okay. You get the idea of what that word is supposed to say. That's hierarchy. You have to enable it, and that will allow you to view tax sub-accounts. Sub-accounts themselves. So now if I open up profit and loss and display that, you now have an additional way of viewing things. Sales sub-account, and it's drilled into beyond inside that. Expense group 1 is now displayed. So that's really useful if you need to have maybe things grouped by department, for example. You could do that. Also, I should comment very briefly that analytic accounts are used similarly. They're not the same as sub-accounts. They're more like a filter that you can apply that can group in a bunch of accounts together from different things. I'm not going to get into analytic accounts right now because there's another webinar that specializes on talking about that. And so it's kind of its own thing, and it's more involved because it actually involves more of the other apps together, like projects and manufacturing, things like that. But I just want to point out that sub-accounts is really just a grouping, a convenient way to group accounts under one parent category of account. Whereas analytic accounts is more like a filter that might take into account a bunch of different random accounts together and bundle those costs together in one analytic account. Anyway, sorry if that's really boring to hear about or hard to follow, but trust me on this one. Sub-accounts are good. They're a good addition. You'll see some value of having that, but they are different than what we had with analytic accounts. And then finally, product margins. Some people aren't aware of how good our product margin report is. It's not technically a dynamic report, but it's along the same lines. And it's generated for you based on a particular window of time that you choose. And then you can hover over every single column to get a lot of information about it. And of course, you can use the filtering and grouping tools that you're familiar with in other Odoo reports. So I'll jump over to that right now, the product margins report down here. Like I said, you have to initially tell it what your period is going to be, because it's going to generate a report for you. It acts a little differently. So in this case, I'll say, sure, the default's fine. I want to show my margins for the whole year. And as you can see, you can also specify, do you want to see calculations based on things that are both open and paid, or only things that have been actually paid, or things that are open and paid or in draft status, so they haven't even been confirmed. So I'm just going to say open and paid. I'm going to generate that report. So here's what it looks like. If you haven't seen it already, basically it gives you a lot of data on every individual product, and you might want to narrow it down using the filter tools. I'll just do a quick one. I'm not, as you can see, any bit of data you can filter on, but in this case, I'm just going to say, just show me the available products ones, things that we actually have in stock. So it's showing me profit levels for each one of these things. I'm not going to explain every single one of these things because they're pretty straightforward, but if you hover over any of them, it's going to show you exactly right at the top that this is what your expected sale is minus the turnover amount. If you hover over turnover, it says what that means. It's the sum of multiplication of invoice price and quantity of customer invoices, so on and so forth. But the main point I'm trying to make here is that if you want to keep a good eye in real time over what sort of profits you've actually made on specific products over a period of time, you can generate the report and view it over here in different ways. And believe it or not, that's actually it for this report, or for this webinar. To sum it up, we started by talking about the chart of accounts and also what's new in version 11 accounting. And then we jumped through line by line each of those dynamic reports and explained sort of what they do on a high level. And then talked briefly about how we now have sub-accounts and also the product margin report. So at this point, if you guys are still awake and still interested in asking some questions, please go ahead and present them over in the chat, and I'll try my best to address them. Like I said, if it is more involved than just sort of a quick answer, I'm going to recommend that we either meet one-on-one or you send us an email to discuss it in person. But still, do we have any questions, Todd, so far?
Yes, absolutely. We've got a fair number, actually. So we'll start with Aya Al-Sagan. Does Odoo support segmentation in the general ledger?
Yeah, so segmentation, the way we would handle that now is through the sub-accounts, essentially. Was this question asked very recently or?
A while back.
Okay, a while back. Yeah, sub-accounts. That's the way to do it now. And it can be a lot more detailed than that. You can have a sub-account within a sub-account within a sub-account. And then you basically just need to choose in your financial report settings that you apply it to the general ledger specifically and set that up. So didn't really have that before, not exactly, but now we do.
Cool. And now we've actually got a handful of questions from Farhan Rashad. First is, what is the objective of account groups? Can we use them in reporting?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Account groups is sub-accounts. So another way of looking at it is that sub-accounts will belong to a group. So anything that is an account belonging to that group, you can use that for bundling things. And I hope seeing that on the profit and loss statement helped. It's better if you see a ton of different accounts to see how they're grouped. But basically, anything within sales sub-account, you can consider a sub-account of that group. So yeah, sales sub-account, that's a group of accounts within it. That's the point of it. And as you can see, of course, I should probably add, if I didn't already point this out, that it summarizes those accounts for you. It doesn't just group them together. It also adds that up and adds it up to a total. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to add, actually, there's a handful of questions I'm noticing here about statement reconciliations. And we actually have an accompanying webinar that covers a fair amount of those things.
Yeah, it's true. That's the goal of this webinar, as dictated by the powers that be, is that, no, we're focusing on dynamic reports for this. Statement reconciliation, you should watch that webinar. But if we don't have any other questions about it, I don't mind talking about it. I'm happy to.
Okay. Well, I mean...
Unless it's a horrible question.
It's not... I think it's fine. Well, I mean, the question was, how can we settle purchase and sale tax balances, at the end of the month? Do you want to take a look at some of these?
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so how can we settle the purchase and sale tax balances at the end of the month, sales tax and purchase tax reconciled and balance amount deposit to the authorities or government agencies? Well, it ties into a little bit about a localization, and this is why we had to spend so much time and so much development working on localization for Mexico and Colombia and things like that. It's because when you mention local agencies and things like that, the requirements are totally different for every country. Mexico's is really involved because you have to, after you generate an invoice, you have to send it to the government for approval. My knowledge of that topic is relatively minimal. But reconciliation itself is handled through the reconciliation screen, usually on a bank element itself. And this does consolidate not just the base amount, but the tax amounts themselves. So technically, you would normally reconcile on this screen through here. As far as setting tax amounts, I'm not sure I completely understand the question. So I feel like I think that would be more of a case for a discussion with us one-on-one. I feel like you probably need to talk it over with your account manager or your overall partner, because it sounds like there's a lot of configuration at play in terms of how you're setting up your tax amounts. And this is really just about the reporting aspect itself. So,
Cool. I'll ask another question then. So how is there a way to increase the reference field size in the partner ledger? I know that there's some that have character limitations. Do you have any insight
Right,
on that?
and that's a really good question, actually. I should talk about that. So I don't know if you guys, if any of you are familiar with Odoo Studio much yet, but I think it's useful to talk about. Odoo Studio is a really good tool for customization across the board. It allows you to change names, change fields, change things like that. And technically, if you want to, you can actually get directly into, and this is kind of opening up a can of worms, and you need to be careful with what you do here, but you can actually get into the XML views of everything and really play around with it. But the dynamic reports themselves, unfortunately, are not as easily customizable, at least as it is right now. It's generated differently, the hierarchy is different, so as you can see, that button isn't even accessible. So if you want to customize things like the character limit, the size, the how it's displayed, things like that, unless you can find it on the financial reports customization screen, which is more like a series of checkboxes, do you include this or do you not? Unless it's included in that and you need some customization to these dynamic reports, you pretty much have to work with us directly to have us do it, or hire a developer to get into the source code and play around with it, or work with an official Odoo affiliate or partner to get it customized. That's just the way it is right now. Could change over the next coming releases, but the way it is right now, the dynamic reports, because of the way they're generated and maintained and the way that they're, the architecture of it really works, it's not easy to manipulate the structure of it itself. I hope that answers your question.
Cool. And I mean, now that you're kind of talking about it a little bit, I mean, do you want to talk a little bit more about the way that Studio interacts with
Sure.
accounting?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Cool.
It doesn't. That's the answer. Studio doesn't interact with the dynamic reports themselves. However, dynamic is the phrase that we use to apply to those 10 reports I showed you, where you have these sort of side-by-side comparison options and cash basis and accrual basis, these kinds of things, printing, exporting. For our normal reports, and when I say normal reports, I mean something like the invoices, where you're just viewing your invoices themselves. It's not considered a dynamic report. This is the more standard reporting form that you'll see across the board for Odoo. It's a little simpler in terms of what it displays, but it's nice depending on what you're looking at. Like sales, it's great for sales, but you can view it graphically, you can view it in pivot chart view. And for these things, there is some stuff that you can do with Odoo Studio, though it's still kind of a work in progress. So for the most part, Odoo Studio has yet to really make much of an impact on accounting itself, except that you can use Studio to link all of your other modules. You can link projects to manufacturing in ways that it didn't used to before, and therefore, in a way, you can log timesheets, which will eventually interact with your accounting. So down the chain, there's things you can do with Studio that will affect your accounting operations, but as far as the reports themselves, dynamic reports and whatnot, Studio doesn't yet really come into play. The only exception maybe on things that we talked about today is on chart of accounts themselves. If you need additional fields on your account itself, you can customize the screen. You can give more information on the account. The catch is that it won't immediately reflect that new character field or that new text field. It's not going to show up on the dynamic report until you have us develop that customization for you, or have a partner customize it, or get into the source code yourself. So I hope that answers that question about Studio's role in dynamic reports so far.
Cool. Another question from Tanzilil Hassan Kenan. Apologize for any butchering of name pronunciations.
You did
question.
great.
Okay, thanks, Brett. Always supportive here. He said with tax reporting, there are two columns, net and tax. He wanted an additional column called gross, and then some taxes which could be related to that gross amount. Is there a way to get that?
Yeah, through customization. Yeah, I agree. That would be a good report to have. If he's basically to repeat the question. Our tax report column is fairly simplistic. It's just showing the net amount that is getting taxed, and it's showing the tax amount itself. Right, Todd?
Yeah.
Right. But if we wanted to, we could customize it to have another column over here that shows this plus this. It would be a simple calculated field to have, but you could have it. However, as far as customizing that, you'd have to work with us, basically, to do that. Unless you could figure it out by going into financial reports, I don't think that would, no, because actually it's not even listed here. It would be, it's just not something that Odoo allows you to customize on your own yet. You'd have to either hard code it in or get us to do it for you. I can safely say it would be pretty easy for us to do it for you, though, and therefore a partner as well could do it. Any other questions?
You know what? Actually, it appears as though we have run the course with our questions. So, Brett, actually, if you want to pull your signature slide back up there, so if anyone wants to check that out, they can go ahead and do that. So you guys, if you want, you can write this information and then enter that web link in there. It's also in the description so that you can set up a meeting with Brett and get more information as you see fit. Now,
I should probably add a caveat to that, or a disclaimer. Unfortunately, I am only allowed to, or only able to actually work with people in North America specifically. We segment our roles here because there's so many leads and whatnot, and we try not to step on anybody's toes. So keep that in mind. Feel free to schedule with me if you want. If you're in a different country that's not North America, you can. But I'll have to basically then send you a link to reschedule with somebody in your target department. What's the word for it? Region. So in other words, if you are in Africa or in Europe, you'd have to work with the Belgian office. If you're in pretty much anywhere in Eastern Asia, Hong Kong or Japan, things like that, you'd be working with the Hong Kong office. And then India actually handles pretty much exclusively India at this point. Latin America, we do have people here at this office, and I could refer you to them specifically. We have a couple people that you could schedule meetings with. Another thing you could do in addition to this link is if you just want to send me some questions via email, that's fine too. And that's easier for me to just forward to the right people if necessary. But my email is bhy@odoo.com. Maybe we'll put that in the comments for the video or something in the description.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that.
Yeah, so.
All right, cool. Well, that's a pretty great rundown of kind of the structure of here at Odoo for sales. So, but yeah, if you do have any questions, also what you can do is if you have very specific or maybe even just general questions, you can send those to Odoo or webinars@odoo.com, and the marketing team will be able to assess those and get those directed to the right person if you aren't sure of who that belongs to. So. Awesome. Well, Brett, thank you so much for your incredibly, riveting and detailed
It was very riveting. It was exciting, I think.
Yeah, I thought so too. I was quite dumbfounded. I was appreciative of it though. But yeah, and if you want to see the complimentary webinar to this, it's the statement and reconciliation one. You can just search that in our YouTube playlist for English language.
There's also just a general intro to accounting one that can be watched as well, I think.
Yes, and that could be a good starting place, especially if you're a community member and want to get more information in that sense. Cool. Well, if you like this video, go ahead and hit subscribe down below. And if you want to go ahead and find out more information about those, you can send emails to webinars@odoo.com, and then check out our event page, odoo.com/events, to find out any information on upcoming webinars. They're every week, so stay tuned. And if you arrive late to this transmission, you can check it out by visiting this link again. So this is a live webinar, but it also becomes a recording immediately after. So if you want to check this out at any time, feel free. I think that's all for today, so thank you guys so much. Signing out. This is Odoo Live.
Cheers.
Have a lovely week. And a happy Halloween next weekend.
Happy Halloween.